John F. Kennedy stood in Ireland in 1963 and did what presidents almost never do. He went looking for a family door, and he did not treat it like a quick photo opportunity. He made it personal. He leaned into the Kennedy name like it was a key that could unlock something older than politics. The cameras loved it, and the story seemed perfect. The son of Irish immigrants comes home, and Ireland welcomes him back. But here's the penalty if you stop there. You end up believing the wrong Irish story about JFK. You believe the Kennedys are the whole center of his Irish past. If you believe that, you miss the deeper pull running through his mother's side. You miss the counties that quietly outnumber the famous Wexford headline. By the end, you'll know what most people don't. The stronger, direct Irish tie in JFK's blood did not come from Kennedy at all. It came from Fitzgerald. Before he became the man in the motorcade, JFK was a boy inside a family with a loud name and high expectations. He did not get to be normal because he was born into a world where ancestry was not small talk. It was identity. A story you carried into rooms, and a tool. The Kennedys had a brand before JFK had a job, and they had a family legend before he had a voice. That kind of pressure shapes a person fast, teaching them how to choose a story. When JFK leaned on Wexford, he was not only honoring family, he was picking the cleanest, clearest line that the public already understood. Kennedy was a headline, and Wexford was a place you could turn into a single shining moment. But the real Irish map behind him was wider and more layered. Start with what people think they know. The paternal Kennedy line points hard to County Wexford. It traces to two great-grandparents there, Patrick Kennedy from Dunganstown and Bridget Murphy from Owenduff. Patrick arrived in Boston in 1849 and worked as a cooper, meaning he made barrels. It is skilled work, but it is still tough work with your hands. Bridget came from nearby Owenduff, which means the Kennedy story at that level is clustered right there in a tight route. This is where the trap snaps shut. People treat JFK's 1963 visit to Wexford like it represents the whole Irish story, but it represents a strong symbol, not the whole picture. On his father's side, only 2 of 8 Irish-born great-grandparents come from this Wexford Kennedy line. The paternal side totals 4 Irish great-grandparents, with 2 others coming from Clare and Cork. That means the Kennedy name is tied to Wexford in a way that is easy to tell, but his father's Irish line is Wexford plus 2 other counties. The public story keeps snapping back to Wexford because it carries the Kennedy label cleanly. You can point to Dunganstown and the year 1849, picturing a cooper stepping off a ship with a trade and a chance. That is a story that fits in one breath. But JFK's mother's side does something different. It stacks, clusters, and deepens. Rose Fitzgerald, JFK's mother, carries the heavier direct Irish tie when you count it by great-grandparents and density. Her line connects to 3 great-grandparents from County Limerick alone. That is not a single thread, that is a rope. Those names sit like anchors. Thomas Fitzgerald and Mary Ann Fitzgerald came from Bruff, and Michael Hannon came from Lough Gur. Bruff and Lough Gur are not the same spot, but they are in the same county and shared world. When a family has 3 great-grandparents from one county, it means Ireland is not just a place they left. It is a place that shaped them again and again through different branches and repeated ties. Thomas Fitzgerald emigrated in 1848, 1 year earlier than Patrick Kennedy's 1849 arrival. Those were years when leaving was a decision made under pressure. Thomas's problem was survival, and his choice was to leave in 1848. His consequence was that his line took root in Massachusetts. Mary Ann Fitzgerald shares the Bruff connection, suggesting a family world that keeps circling back to the same place. Michael Hannon enters from Lough Gore, facing the same hard math of staying or going. His line ends up feeding into Rose Fitzgerald's ancestry, deepening that Limerick cluster. Then another tie tightens the knot. Mary Josephine Hannon, described as Honey Fitz's wife, deepened the Limerick cluster. This matters because it shows the maternal side is not a single Irish link, but a web layered through marriages. Rosa Anna Cox adds another county set tied to Cavan and Fermanagh. So the maternal side has 4 Irish great-grandparents as well, but packed more tightly with 3 from Limerick and 1 from Cavan Shir Fermanagh. That density in Limerick is the surprise that shifts the center of gravity. When JFK visited Wexford in 1963, he stepped into the story people expected him to tell. Kennedy, Wexford, Boston, rise, return. It was the easiest Irish thread for the world to hold, but he was not highlighting that the deeper county cluster sits on his mother's side. He was not saying, my strongest direct Irish tie is Fitzgerald. He was not giving Limerick the same spotlight, even though 3 of his great-grandparents trace there. Public identity often picks the most famous label, not the densest truth. In a family like his, the father's name is the banner, while the mother's line can be the hidden structure holding it up. JFK is not just the Kennedy who went back to Wexford. He is also the son of Rose Fitzgerald, carrying a Limerick heavy Irish line that is strictly stronger in direct county clustering. If you stop there, you're holding the wrong picture. By the end of this, you'll know what most people don't. Every single one of JFK's 8 great-grandparents crossed the ocean from Ireland to Boston during the years of the Great Famine. Not 1, not 2, but all 8. That is not a fun detail. That is a survival pattern starting with hunger, fear, and eviction. It ends with a president whose life looked safe on television, even though his family story began on the edge of collapse. Kennedy sounded strong in America by then, but the roots of that belonging were newer than people guess. His family story was a rush and a flood beginning with people escaping a disaster that killed about 1 million and forced over 1 million to flee. The Great Famine in Ireland ran from 1845 to 1852, driven by potato blight. When the crop failed, work disappeared, rent still had to be paid, and landlords pushed people out. JFK didn't live through that, but he lived because people did. When he later traveled to Ireland, he was walking into the reason his family existed in Boston at all. Those 8 great-grandparents came as people trying to stay alive. Patrick Kennedy's problem was the famine world closing in, so he chose to leave around 1848 to 1849. Bridget Murphy faced the same storm. Her choice was to leave around 1849, finding survival through movement. Thomas Fitzgerald left around 1852 to 1854, late in the famine window, but close enough to carry the damage. Marianne Fitzgerald left around the late 1840s into the 1850s, joining the stream leaving Ireland. Rosanna Cox from Fermanagh left around the 1840s to 1850s, showing the famine's reach beyond one village. James Hickey left around the 1840s, and Margaret M. Field left Cork around the 1840s. Michael Hannon left Limerick around the 1840s to 1850s. They traveled on coffin ships where disease spread and people died. The choice to leave was a choice to risk death at sea, because staying felt like another kind of death. Boston pulled them in because it already had Irish neighbors, but anti-Irish bias waited there too. JFK's ancestors had just enough means to pay fares, a brutal middle position where they were too poor to be safe at home, but not so poor they couldn't move. JFK is often pictured as smooth and comfortable, but behind him is a pattern of people who did not belong at first. The family climbed from outsiders to power inside one city, then one state, then the whole country. If you have one Irish line, you can wear it like a ribbon, but if you have 8, it wraps around everything. Every branch of JFK's great-grandparent level points back to Ireland during the famine era. JFK entered a world where belonging was never fully guaranteed, facing public eyes and expectations instead of hunger. He crossed rooms full of people judging him, carrying a family name shaped by people who learned that survival depends on making choices fast. When JFK went to Ireland, he was stepping into the starting line of his family's escape. On June 27, 1963, he did the most unpresidential thing you can picture. He went to a tiny thatched cottage in Dunganstown, County Wexford, the home tied to his great-grandfather Patrick Kennedy. He stood there in a modest homestead linked to famine poverty and let the moment land. Later, he would call that Ireland trip the best 4 days of my life. This was not a man collecting cheers. This was a man collecting pieces of himself. He keeps comparing the humble origins to the fact that he is now president. He says his great-grandfather left carrying nothing except a strong religious faith and a strong desire for liberty. In Ireland's Parliament on June 28, 1963, he jokes that his great-grandfather might never have left, and he might be sitting down there with them. He toasts to all those Kennedys who went and all those Kennedys who stayed. He says it because the visit makes him see the split in every emigrant family. The problem in the family memory is famine poverty, which squeezes choices until only 2 are left: leave or stay. Patrick Kennedy chose to go, and the consequence is the family's entire future. He shares tea with cousins like Mary Ryan amid cheers. Tea is intimate. It is what families do. He stands at New Ross Quay and looks west, imagining Boston docks where relatives thrived. He turns geography into memory. Patrick leaves carrying nothing but faith and liberty. Kennedy arrives carrying the title of president. He accepts that his own life is tied to a modest homestead linked to famine poverty. There is a detail hidden in plain sight that changes how you see him. JFK's Irish world was tight, closed, and built like a braided rope. His mother's parents were not strangers who met and fell in love. John Honey Fitzgerald and Mary Josephine Hannon were second cousins. In Boston's Irish immigrant circles, it was common and accepted because people leaned on their own. Their shared ancestry traced back to Limerick, to great-great-grandparents Mary Ann Fitzgerald and Michael Hannon. Those ancestors emigrated during the famine. Honey Fitz was the son of Thomas Fitzgerald and Rosanna Cox, while Mary Josephine Hannon was the daughter of Mary Ann Fitzgerald and Michael Hannon. When Honey Fitz married Mary Josephine, he married into his own extended family. Honey Fitz had a choice: marry outside the circle or marry inside the network, where family ties strengthened his base. He chose Mary Josephine, and the consequence was a stronger family unit inside Boston's Irish Catholic world. This Fitzgerald-Hannon network was its own engine, feeding the machine from a different angle. JFK inherited 2 Irish streams that had already been pulled together. JFK mirrored his ancestors in one way and contrasted them in another. They tightened the family web to survive. He used that web to step beyond it. Behind the polished image were 2 second cousins in a marriage that was family as strategy, built under pressure. In about 112 years, the line went from famine-era poverty in Dunganstown to the White House in 1961. Patrick Kennedy worked the docks and opened a saloon. A saloon was a hub, a meeting place where politics entered the bloodline through a handshake. P.J. Kennedy became a ward boss and expanded into banking. Honey Fitz became mayor of Boston using charisma and graft. Joseph P. Kennedy had education and access, entering banking at 25 and moving into Hollywood speculation. By 1929, he had made millions and bought the merchandise mart. He groomed JFK for the presidency. The earlier Kennedys fought to be allowed in the room. JFK was born into a family that could rent the room. When JFK arrived in Ireland, the welcome was not polite. It was loud and physical. About 1.5 million spectators turned out. Dave Powers said Kennedy was never easier, more completely himself. In Ireland, the costume of the presidency loosened. He even ran, which was not his usual style. The climax came at the Dunganstown cottage where he had tea with cousins. He toasted Kennedys who went and stayed. In Limerick, he said, "This is not the land of my birth, but the land for which I hold the greatest affection." He was the first Catholic president of the United States, and in Ireland, that mattered. The trip became a blissful interlude after Berlin tension. He was living a version of the ancestor pressure, Cold War danger instead of famine. In Ireland, he became the returning relative. He said those were the best 4 days because he did not have to fight for approval. Only 5 months later came November 22nd. When Kennedy was killed, Ireland mourned it as a deeply personal loss. Flags went to half-mast, businesses closed for masses, and people lined up at the U.S. Embassy to sign condolence books. Tawi Seach Sean Lamas's aides struggled with words like shock, horror, shattered. President Eamon de Valera sent Jackie Kennedy a telegram saying, "The whole Irish people mourn. Soul of your husband who had become so dear to us is family language." De Valera attended the funeral, and Irish cadets drilled at Arlington. New Ross was steeped in sorrow because he had become our icon. If he had never visited, Ireland might have mourned like a respectful friend. Instead, it mourned like family. JFK also sat in 1961 with a coat of arms that alluded to the O'Kennedys of Ormond. The claim is that his paternal line descends from ancient Gaelic kings like Brian Boru. The O'Cinéide chiefs ruled Ormond until the 17th century, but then they lost ground and migrated to Dunganstown by 1740. Patrick Kennedy links to this line through traditional records, but DNA shows Kennedy surname diversity. Most family trees are not royal, they are human. The O'Kennedys had to retreat and become farmers to survive. The royal claim is a hint, not a biological lock, but it flips the script from poor newcomers to old family. JFK stood in 1961 carrying a name that some linked to kings and others to immigrant struggle. The coat of arms was a quiet signal. His Irish ancestry is a story of tradition, movement, pride, and caution. The simple version says he was a Boston politician with Irish roots. The fuller one shows a surname that carried chiefs, farmers, immigrants, and a president. JFK walked into Ireland in June 1963 and let the country see a version of itself standing tall. He left behind a feeling that he belonged, and in death, Ireland mourned him because he had come home.